Welcome back to another video, and today we have another design project. For today's video I'm going to be working in Fusion 360. That being said, even though I'm using Fusion 360 here, if you're a FreeCAD user or an Onshape user, the principles and the concepts here apply across the board. So it's not always about what CAD package you use, but the steps you take toward the design process and how you actually apply your thinking to making designs easier. So what we'll be designing today is a razor guard. This is for hair clippers that you can use obviously to shave your head or your beard or whatever. And this one in particular has broken. One of them has snapped off and I tried to super glue it. And I thought to myself, this is a great idea for a video and just a great example of practical 3D printing. I guarantee stuff like this happens all the time around the house or at work. Something will break and something will click in your head and go, I can design one of those and I can 3D print it as well. At first glance this looks like quite a complex shape. I'll do some close-ups of it so you can get a better look, but basically one of the teeth on the end here snapped off and it's not usable anymore. Now one thing we're going to make use of in this video is something called digital calipers. You might have some of these lying around, and if you're a common user of CAD and you 3D print things regularly, this is probably your best friend. If you don't know what it is, it's just a digital ruler that lets you measure things really accurately. I recommend investing in a reliable one that's certified, and I'll leave a link to this one down in the description below if you're interested. These are going to be used to make accurate measurements of the part that we're going to replicate. That way, when we actually design and 3D print it, there's a much higher chance that it's going to be fit for purpose, and you won't have to keep adjusting and reprinting. So one of the questions I get asked the most is just generally, how do you design things in CAD? You know, most people are always looking for a tutorial that covers exactly what they're looking to design. And that's okay when, you know, you're really early on and you're just learning. But where you truly learn how to use CAD is when you try and do something like this, right? You have something lying around the house, you really want to replicate and 3D print it, and you have to start thinking to yourself, how am I going to do this? You know, which steps am I going to take that'll make designing this the easiest? So whenever you're designing anything, you have to take a close look at the object, and you need to identify certain patterns or things in the design that could make your life easier, right? So for example, with this, our immediate first thought is, which orientation should I design this in? Now if you design something like this top down, like this, that's immediately going to be quite a lot more complicated, right? Because we've got a rising edge here where the angle comes up, but we've got a flat piece at the bottom. The dead giveaway for something like this is this repeating pattern across the teeth. And whenever you see a pattern like that, we know straight away there's tools in CAD that we can create rectangular patterns or circular patterns depending what you want. That saves you time, effort, and it'll speed up your design. So knowing about patterns, we know that we want to design this on a side profile. So we only have to sketch a one shape here, which is the edge of this clip guard. Once we have that edge profile, we can extrude all the way back, we'll have a full shape. So let's actually do the design, and this will start to make more sense to you. I'm going to use the digital calipers to make all the measurements necessary. I won't show all that on the screen because it'll take up time, and all you really need to know is what the values are. So I'll plug them into our parameters and we'll get started. Now you guys know I'm a big advocate of parametric modeling, and a lot of you would say, well, is it worth using parametric modeling for something like this? And my honest answer to that would be to an extent, but not for everything. Because this is a single component that only really has one job, it fits to the clippers and that's it, I'd say there's not much need to do heavy parametric modeling, simply because for me personally in my use, this isn't going to change very much. We could add a few parameters that would alter the width of the guard and also the height here. So we could add those in, just in case somebody wanted to fit these to clippers that were wider. But for the teeth themselves, we can keep that simple, and we won't really have to use parameters for that. Alright, so let's get started. So the first thing we always want to do is create a new component. We're going to name the component guard and hit OK. Now we're going to create a new sketch, and as I said before, we want to do this with a side profile, right? Because we're going to sketch it like this. So we're going to choose our right sketch profile here. Another thing I always like to emphasize is we always use the center point as a reference. So just to kind of get something down here, we're going to create a rectangle, center rectangle, and just get a shape of it, right? We know roughly what the shape is going to be, so we can kind of sketch this out and then add the measurements afterwards, or at least that's what I like to do. So let's go ahead and sketch a rough shape. So we've got the line tool here, we can look at our part, and I'm just going to roughly get a shape of it. On the back here we also have another piece that kind of comes up, but this is in the middle, so you can see that here. So we're just going to add that in, and then also a top piece here. So that's our basic outline. You can see this looks really rough, right? There's no parameters in there, all our lines are blue. Never create a model with something like this. You always need to add information about position and dimension, so let's go ahead and do that. First I'm going to go and add the parameters in that I think are necessary. So we'll go up to modify, change parameters. We're just going to add in a few. So the first one's going to be width. That's 45.3. We'll hit OK. Then we're going to do length. Now I'm going to measure the length here to the point where the guard starts angling up. That's going to be 32.3 according to my digital calipers. We'll also add another one called height. Our height's going to be 2 millimeters. And for now we're just going to hit OK. So now let's go ahead and add in some of these parameters so that we can keep Fusion 360 happy and we've got all our constraints in place. Hit D on the keyboard, which will bring up the dimension tool, and we're now going to set the height. So we're going to select our two horizontal lines here. We're going to add in a height, so this is going to be height. You see this model is going to get a little smaller, but that's okay. We're also going to apply the height to all the other parts since the thickness is going to be the same. So we'll select these two. That's also going to be height, and the same for this one here. And this way we can just change the thickness of it a lot easier afterwards. Now these lines here obviously need to be parallel, so we can use our constraints for that. So up on our constraints menu, there's one here called parallel. We're going to click that. We'll select this first one and the second one. You can see that makes them parallel, and now everything's looking good. Next thing we're going to do here is add in our length for this part. So we're going to select this line and this line. We created a parameter, so let's call it length. There we go. You can see that got a little smaller. Don't worry just yet, we'll fix this in a second. Next thing we're going to have to do is set an angle here for this leading edge of the guard. So let's go to our parameters again, and we're just going to add in guard angle. So we're going to change our unit here to degrees and make that 45. Okay. Now we need to set this up because if we click and drag, you can see we can move all this around, and we know that's bad. So we're going to hit D on the keyboard. Again, we're going to click our diagonal line here, click our horizontal line. Notice now we can set an angle. Now we want that angle to be 45 degrees from the vertical line, but we can easily correct that because we know this is a 90-degree angle here. So we can just do 90 plus guard angle, hit OK, and you can see there it's now set that for us. These lines have gone black, which means that's fixed. We can no longer move that part around. I'm now going to add a height here to this piece, and I'm going to make that 8.16. Straight away that makes it smaller, and we also now need to add a horizontal distance for this piece here. So I'm going to measure that up. That's going to be 9 millimeters. So straight away this is already looking a lot better. This is still a little long here, so what we'll do now is set the length of that. So again, we grab our digital calipers, we measure this up. So we're going to set the length of this one. We'll grab these 2 points, and this is going to be 17.25. There we go, we have our length for that. And notice because we don't have additional parameters, we can still move all this around and it looks really weird. We're just going to drag this back down till it kind of looks right again. We'll zoom in. Next we need to set a length here for this pointed edge, because if you notice we can still click and change it. So we need to set that up. So again, we measure. That is going to be 8.75. So as you can see, all of our sketch objects have turned black, and that means Fusion 360 knows all about position and dimension. If you want to learn more about these key concepts, I do have a Fusion 360 for Beginners course available for website members. If you're interested in that, I'll leave a link down below. Alright, so we've got our main side profile sketched out. There's a couple little bits I'm going to add as well that I can see here on the razor, and we can get away with this using the side profile. But let's go ahead and add those additional pieces. So the first one is just going to be another rectangle, so we'll grab that tool. So we're just going to sketch out here a rough shape. And remember, we can use the other lines as a reference as well. So if we select on that line, that's now coincident with that line. And we can go ahead and add in more dimensions. So I'm going to hit D on the keyboard. I'm going to measure up one more time. This is going to be horizontal 8.1. Vertical is going to be 7 millimeters. And now we still have these two blue lines, so we need to tell Fusion 360 where this sits along this horizontal line. And I've measured that up and we want to go for 6.75. There we go. It now knows where it is relative to everything else. So now that we're done with this sketch, we're going to hit finish. If we rotate around a bit, you can see now we have something that really does resemble this shape. So now we can quite easily extrude this backwards. We've already set up a parameter called width. So let's go ahead, hit extrude, and we're going to select the sketch profiles that we want to use. And in this case, we're not going to use them all because we'll come back to a few of the others later on. So we're just going to select a few of these. And that's all we want for now. This back one, as you can see on the clipper, that doesn't start at the very edge. It kind of starts somewhere in the middle, so we're going to leave that one. Now on our extrude menu here on the right, we're going to change direction to 2 sides. And the reason for this is that we keep our model centered around the origin, and it'll make adding these other parts a bit easier later on. So all this means is that we just extrude in 2 directions instead of 1. So we know what the width is, so we extend in each direction, width divided by 2. So let's go do that. So we can do width divided by 2 for this first one. And then on the second one, we also have width divided by 2. So you can see it's extruded the correct distance, just obviously in 2 directions. We'll hit OK. And now if we come back to our component tree, drop down for sketch, we'll rename our sketch to side profile. You can see now that our sketch is there in the middle, and we have this really cool shape that's starting to resemble this razor guard. So now let's go ahead and add these other parts that I talked about. So we'll hit extrude again, we'll select these 2, and once again we're going to change direction to 2 sides. And doing this basically saves you having to create a offset plane if you just extrude it in one direction. So it can speed up your workflow a bit, and it makes things a bit easier. So now I'm going to go ahead and measure the width of this piece. The width is 12.5, but remember we want to divide that by 2 each way. So we're going to do 12.5 divided by 2, and the same in the other direction. And we're going to make sure the operation is join, which will make it the same object. Hit OK. And there we go. We can now see we've got our side profile, and it's starting to look a lot more like this. There's a couple of small details we can add, so let's go back to the original sketch. We'll double click side profile. On the clippers there are 2 slots next to that little clip that we designed, so we're going to go and add those in. We can do that again really simply, just using a simple 2-point rectangle. We're going to select one of these corners as a coincident point, and the same for this line. And now all we need to do is add a horizontal distance to this. So hit D on the keyboard, we can select these 2, and if I go and measure this up, that distance is going to be 7.5. Hit enter. We finish our sketch, and now if we come back out, you can see that is in there. Now sometimes when you have a sketch like this that's in the middle of a body, you can't always select the parts that are not visible. So you can simply come over here, click this little icon which will hide the bodies. You can then grab the extrude tool, click on the piece we want to select, which in this case is this. Come back to bodies, show again, and now we're going to add in those 2 slots. So we're going to use 2 separate cuts to do this. Looking at our object, that little slot starts from this face here where the clip starts. So fortunately in Fusion 360 this is easy. We can just come up to the extrude menu where it says start, click the drop down, we're going to select object. Now if we click that face, that'll start a cut for us from that object. Now I've measured that little slot and the measurement is 1.5. So if we enter 1.5 and we rotate around, you can see it's going to add that cut for us. Make sure the operation is set to cut and hit OK. So there we go. That's our first slot added. We now need to do the exact same thing for the other side. Unfortunately, because of the way we've gone about this design, extruding in 2 directions, we can really easily use the mirror tool because we have our origin axis is still through the middle where our sketch profile is. So if we go up to create mirror, we're now going to select these faces here where the cut is. We're going to select our mirror plane, and you can see here our side profile plane that we sketched on shows up. If we click on that, you can see that kind of leaves an outline for us on the other side. We're going to hit OK, and there we go. We now have a slot mirrored straight to the other side, and you saw how easy and quick that was rather than having to go back in and create another extrusion. It's just a lot more efficient, and this is what the design process is all about. Next up, we're going to add those 2 edge clips using this piece here that we sketched. So we're going to grab the extrude tool, click on this, and once again we're going to do 2 separate extrusions. So we're going to start from object. This time we want the very edge of the clippers. I'm going to go ahead and measure the width of these. Once again, the width is 1.5. And notice there I've actually not selected one of the parts of the sketch. So let's go back to the extrude menu, click on profiles. We're going to add that other one that we didn't select, and there we go. So we're going to hit OK. Make sure your operation is set to join. Hit OK, and we now have one of those clips. We're going to do the exact same on the other side. So let's reverse it around. We come up to extrude. We select that first point. Remember, you can hide the bodies so that you can see the sketch faces. Let's show our bodies again, and same thing again. So we're going to start from object, select this edge. We'll make this minus 1.5 because we have to come backwards in this case. Operation set to join, hit OK. Now if we hide our sketch profile, you can see now this is really starting to come along, and if you think about it, we haven't done anything too complicated here, you know? The object looks quite complicated when you see it in person like that, but we've only created one sketch. We've done all this with one sketch. And I think that really emphasizes on how your mindset and your thinking process, logical problem solving, can really assist in your designs and make you so much more efficient. So looking at our object now, if we look at it from the side profile, you can see there's a little mistake here. So the width of these I set to be 2 millimeters, and that follows through all the way through until we get to this angled piece. And let's have a look why that is. So let's go into side profile, and you can see why that is. So we're using a coincident point here, which is fixing that line to the edge of this rectangle. The rectangle has a height set. We set it over here to be 2. So wherever the corner of that rectangle is where this line will start. And that's not good, because if we measure these using the measure tool, you can see that that's only 1.414, which is not what we want. Now if we try to click this and make a change, it says it's going to be over constrained and there are conflicts, and you never want an over constrained sketch. It's going to lead to issues and it just won't work. So we're going to hit cancel, and the reason it's over constrained is because we've already set up those constraints, right? All the lines are black, meaning that it's quite happy and it's comfortable to let you go on and extrude and create your 3D model. But in this case, we want to get rid of that. So let's go and zoom into our corner point. And notice here we've got these 3 symbols. Well, these symbols are constraints. And if you look up on the constraints toolbar, those symbols match the coincident constraint, which we already know. So we need to delete the constraint that makes this line constraint with the corner of this rectangle. It's hard to tell which one of those it is. So to quickly fix this, what we'll do is we'll hit T on the keyboard, which is the trim tool. We're going to trim this entire line here. Now, a lot of our sketch objects will turn blue, but we can fix that, remember. So we'll trim this line. That'll completely get rid of it. Now, we're going to grab a new line, and this time, rather than start it on the corner here, we're going to start it somewhere on the line. So we're just going to go up and join those together. Now remember, we want to add an angle in once again, so we'll click D on the keyboard, click our diagonal line, click the top of our rectangle here, and remember we did 90 plus guard angle, hit enter, and we've now got our angle. We need to re-add our parallel constraint here, so let's go up to the constraints menu, click on parallel, we're going to click these 2 lines. You can see that made it parallel, and now the only parameter we're missing is this height one. So you can see now we can drag this around, and we just need to set that height. So hit D on the keyboard, we're going to click these 2 lines, click once again, and we're going to hit 2 millimeters. Hit enter, and now if we click finish, we look at our side profile once again, and you can see now that the whole thing is following those measurements with a total thickness of 2 millimeters. As I said, you know, I kept this raw, and that was a great example there of how you can make an innocent mistake by not really realizing it early on, and then you figure it out as you go and just go back and correct things. But it's important to ensure that your sketches are all following the rules and that all your sketch objects are black and there's nothing floating around just doing whatever it wants. So other than a few clip locks and a couple of fancy fillets, all we're missing now is that pattern on this front guard. So let's go ahead and do that, and this is the fun part. So once again, we're going to show our side profile. We're going to hide the body, and for this we're going to select the whole leading edge of our guard here. So we're going to select this one and this one, and now if we come back and show our bodies here, you can see now we have something here that will cut, right? We can cut away from wherever we want. So again, looking at our object, that center guard tooth there is directly in the middle. So we need to measure the width of that. So the width is going to be 2.75, but this is something we're likely going to have to play around with. So let's go up to modify, change parameters, and let's create a new parameter. So we're just going to call it tooth width. So let's add that. And as I said, 2.75. Hit OK. Now let's go back here. We're going to select our objects again, extrude. We're going to select this one and this one. We show the body, and we want to leave that part of the tooth in the middle. So what we're going to do here is we're going to start at an offset. The offset will be half of the tooth width. So let's do that. We can enter tooth width here divided by 2. The extent here is how far we want that to extend to. So we're going to extend to object. And in this case, it's going to be the very edge of the clippers. And you can see what that's going to do is it's going to cut away all that extrusion that we just created, and that's okay. So we're going to hit OK. And what we're left with now is that one in the middle. So what we'll do is the exact same on the other side. So let's hide the body, extrude. We're going to select our 2 sketch profiles, come back to the body, rotate around. Once again, we're going to do start at an offset, and we're going to come back here by minus tooth width divided by 2 once again. Again, we're doing minus because we're coming towards us, so it's the opposite direction. And we're going to do extent type to object, and this time we're going to select the far edge of the other side. You can see that's going to create another cut for us, so let's hit OK. And now let's hide that sketch in the middle. So you can see what we're left with now is the base of our clippers, and we have this one tooth in the middle. And you might be thinking, well, what was the reason for that? You know, what was the point in extruding all the way back and then cutting half of it away? And again, it's just a workflow thing. There's no right or wrong way to do it. I just like doing it this way because we still only have our one sketch, and we've created all of this from one sketch. Okay, so now that we have that center tooth there, what we can do is use a tool called a rectangular pattern, which will duplicate that feature across the width of the guard, and this just makes it really easy for us to replicate parts of our design. So let's go and do that. So we're going to come up to the menu here, we're going to click on create, come down to pattern, rectangular pattern, and first of all make sure your type is set to faces, and it's going to ask you to select objects, or in which case these are faces. So we're going to go and select the faces of our tooth. Now we're not going to select the top face here or the bottom face, simply because this is all one body since we use the join operation. And if we select this top face here like this, it'll try and duplicate the whole thing. We don't want that, so let's deselect the top and the bottom. All the other faces need to be selected. Once you've done that, underneath object here on the menu there's a little box called select. We're going to click on that, and that is going to ask us to select our direction. Now in this case, we want to extend this pattern along the x-axis, which in this case represents the red line. If you're not sure which one represents, look up in the top right and you'll see the little cube which have the axis coloured. The red is the x-axis, so we're going to select that. As I said before, the guard has 4 teeth either side of the centre one, so we're going to go and enter in here 4, and now we can set the distance. So just to show you, if we click this arrow and drag it, you can see what we've got now is additional teeth here. And you could just drag this and kind of manually eyeball it, but we're not going to do that because we have a few parameters that we can use. And remember, we know the width here of our guard. So let's type in width. Now remember, we're working here with half of the guard, so we're going to have to do width divided by 2. And if we put that in brackets, now if we zoom in, you can see here it's taking it further than the edge. And the reason for that is because we're not starting from the exact center here. We're starting at an offset. And the offset we're starting from is half of the width of that tooth. So you can see here the origin comes all the way down halfway through that tooth. So all we need to do is simply subtract tooth width divided by 2, and you can see now that lines up perfectly with the edge of our clippers here. We don't want it lining up to the very edge of the clip, because it doesn't on this one either, because that actually goes around the clippers themselves. So that's exactly what we want. And just to go through that again, so we've got the width of the clippers divided by 2, then we're subtracting from that the tooth width divided by 2. One thing again I've quickly noticed here, another mistake, is I've only added 3 next to it. So let's go back in on the timeline down here on the bottom. You'll see this little icon pattern. Let's double click it, and straight away in there we can just make changes. We're going to change quantity to 5. Basically it includes the one you already select at the start. So if we hit OK now, we now have the center one with 4 teeth to the left, and we'll create another 4 teeth to the right. So let's do that again. So let's go to create pattern, rectangular pattern. We'll do the same process again. You could use a mirror to do this as well, but I just want to get you familiar with this so you can learn it. So we're going to go and select those faces. Remember again, we don't select this whole top face or the bottom face, we just want the sides. We're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to go to direction. We're going to select our red x-axis here. We're going to change this to 5. We're going to pull it down towards the other side. And we do the exact same thing again. So we're going to do a minus this time because we're going in the opposite direction. We'll create some brackets. We'll do width divided by 2. And this time it's going to be plus tooth width divided by 2. If we go to that top view, you can see that lines up really nicely with the edge. We're going to hit OK. And there we go, we now have all of our teeth in place, and you can see that was relatively easy. What I find really fascinating as well is we still only created one sketch. We did all this with one sketch. You know, a lot of people have habits of creating a new sketch for everything, but you don't have to do that. You know, be a minimalist with your sketches and your design process in general. There's a few tiny other details that I'm going to add in before we clean this up a bit. So let's once again go back to our original sketch. Now there's a little piece on here where this back clip kind of locks on to the razor. So we're going to just add that in real quick. And we're going to go up here, grab the 2-point rectangle again. And we're just going to add this on here. It's going to be a tiny little piece. So we'll zoom in. The width here is going to be 1.25. And the height is going to be 2 millimeters. Now again, we need to set this at a distance along this horizontal point. So again, let's hit D on the keyboard. We're going to add this distance, and it's going to be 1.8. Hit finish, and you can see where that's going to be. Once again, we're in the center. So just like we did before, we're going to extrude, select our sketch profile. We're going to change direction to 2 sides, and now we're going to set that distance. So I'm going to go ahead and measure that. The total distance is 3 millimeters, so we're going to do 1.5 either side. Make sure the operation is join and hit OK. We can then hide the side profile, come back out. You can see we just got that little detail on there. There is also one more, so let's go back to the side profile. We're going to create another 2-point rectangle here on the top. This one is going to match the height of this, so that's going to be 2 mil. The width of that once again is going to be 1.25. And then we're going to have a 45-degree line coming straight down here. We can set that angle up. Hit D on the keyboard, grab your angle, 45 degrees. We're going to hit finish sketch. Now, rather than go through the extrude process all over again, we can simply edit the previous one. So if we come to the previous extrude that we did on the timeline on the bottom, double click, you'll see now that that other face has showed up here. So we can also just select those. And it also adds those in for us, just by modifying the previous sketch. And that's basically it, that's the entire thing. Now all we have to do is add some finishing touches, polish this up a bit by adding some fillets around the edges. And that really makes a difference with your 3D models. Now the fillets don't have to be perfect because they're mostly cosmetic, but for something like this, you don't really want really sharp edges here on the edge of the teeth, because if you're putting that up against your skin on your head, you know, you don't want it to cut you. So you want quite a nice rounded edge. So we'll go around and add all these in. So we'll start with the teeth. So let's grab the fillet tool up here on the menu. And the first ones we're going to select are the very pointed edges here. So we can go through these, just select each line one at a time. And again, these can all be parameters if you want them to be. In this case, I'm not going to do that, but it is something you can do. So we're just going to drag that down till we've got a nice kind of rounded edge that kind of suits the model. So that looks a bit much, so let's come back. I'd say that's perfect. So that's 0.5mm fillet. Say OK. We've also got these other harsh edges, so we'll grab the fillet tool again. Let's grab these. These are going to be slightly different radius, which is why I didn't group them with the other ones. So let's spin this around. We just want a little radius here. I'll probably go less. Let's try 0.25. Yeah, that's good. That'll work. So let's hit OK. So you can see we've just taken the knife edge off of those, you know, which you don't want scraping against your head. So we can also add some fillets underneath here for additional strength. So we'll go and select each of these. So let's spin that around and we'll just add these in. I think we'll make this one a bit larger, probably 2.25, just because it'll give us strength there and it'll make it a bit easier to print. So let's hit OK. We'll then round off these bottom edges here. We'll go through those, flip it around. We only want a little bit here. 1.5, that works. And one of the things I'm going to do here, which this design didn't have, was in between the teeth here, there's no fillet. Fillets do add strength to 3D prints, and it stops the snapping from happening. So this one had a snapped edge. So we'll grab the fillet tool again, and we'll select the corners here where the teeth start. So if we go through all of them, select them all, we'll then flip around and grab the other ones, and we'll go to the top view. Now we know the tooth width here, so the radius is going to be half of that. So let's do tooth width divided by 2. And you can see that should give us a nice rounded edge. And that should aid in the strength of these parts. So let's click OK. And I guess if you wanted to, you could make that a bit bigger. But I'm going to just stick with as close to this as I can. So let's hit OK. And there we go. This is now starting to look pretty good. There's also another part here we can add some strength to. So let's go through these. Go with 2.25, and ideally as well, you know, to speed up your workflow, you could have made some of these fillets on that original center tooth that we had before we created the pattern. That way you'd only have to click the edges once, but again it's the exact same process, and this is more just about getting you understanding the workflow. So now let's add the fillets to these edge clips here. So we'll just click this one, rotate it around, we'll do this one, and if I have a look at these, they're just kind of rounded off. Probably a little less than that. I'd say around 2mm. So I'm happy with that. I'm going to hit OK. We also have some more rounded edges here on this. So let's drag that in. Let's have a look. Yep, 2mm again. Quite happy with that. We can also fillet these. Let's zoom into there. Again, we just want to meet in the middle. I can't remember the exact distance that this was. 0.75. And you'll know because it'll go smooth and it'll look good. So let's hit OK. And finally, I think we have some rounded edges here on the corners of the guard. Yep, so let's hit OK. There's also a fillet as well here and here. So let's add those. 1.25, maybe 1mm. Okay. Alright, so let's go ahead and change our view here to perspective. So we right click, perspective. That just makes the model look a little bit better. And there we have it. So now let's try and play around with our parameters and see if we did this properly. So let's go to modify, change parameters. Let's drag this across. Now let's go ahead and change the width from 45.3 to 60. Hit enter. And you can see straight away with our parametric modeling, everything has adjusted itself. And we could now fit this to a clippers that was slightly wider than what this was originally intended for. So if for whatever reason I print this and it's a little too small or a little too big, I can make tiny little changes here that'll improve it. Same goes here for the guard angle. So if we want to change this angle, let's make it say 70, hit OK. You can see that's adjusted our angle there for us. So let's change it back, 45. And we can also adjust the tooth width as well. So that's 2.75. So let's go ahead and make that 3.75. Hit OK. You see the teeth have adjusted as well. So once again, I'm a big advocate of parametric modeling and the power of it. And even though I'm only designing this for my own clippers and it'll only fit on my clippers, still I can make changes, and I'll probably put this file up on my website for my website members. So if anyone downloads this and wants to make a change, they can go and do that. So let's quickly change everything back. So you can see there we relatively easily designed something that looks quite complex in Fusion 360 using a single sketch. It looks pretty good. One final tip, you can add color to your model by coming up to modify, appearance. Let's go down to plastic. I'm going to select and drag ABS white here into the design. We'll then double click it, and I think I'm going to make these red. So let's drag our slider to the red. We can then drag and drop this onto our model, and there we go. We can close this, and there we go. So this has just been a prime example of something in everyday life that you come across and you think to yourself, I can do CAD, I can design that, and I can 3D print it. And it happens a lot, and you'll be surprised when you start learning these skills. You'll always be finding things and thinking of things that you can either fix or design from scratch. And that's what makes it fun, you know, that's what this is all about. It isn't always about creating massive projects that are complicated. Sometimes it's just fun and satisfaction in designing something like this. As always, I hope you learned something, and I'll see you in the next video. If you made it this far into the video, thank you so much for watching. I just wanted to quickly reach out and ask for your support. If you appreciate these videos that I put out for free on YouTube, please consider becoming a website member to support me. My biggest goal is to do this full time and keep inspiring people through teaching and sharing my own projects. You can help make this a reality by becoming a website member, and I'd really appreciate it. In return for your membership, you gain access to my Fusion 360 for Beginners course. You also get access to my 3D CAD files for all of my projects. And finally, you'll gain access to the members only Discord channel where you can hang out with the other members and ask me questions. All links to these web pages I'll put in the description down below. Any support would be massively appreciated. Thank you, and back to the video.